Hello, everyone. It's almost like a reunion. Many people reunion. A warm welcome to this special event around the theme landscape literacy. And together with Erik Luiten and Saskia de Wit, we organized this event to finalize 10-year degree of our master track, but also because of a donation, book donation. The renowned garden and landscape architecture historian, Professor Erik Jong. We are very grateful for that, but we come to that later. And I'm very happy to have you all here. My name is Steffen, Nijhuis, if you don't know me. I'm a professor of landscape-based urbanism and also head of the section landscape architecture. And I'm hosting this event this afternoon. So the program will be as follows. And, we have a great lineup with our keynote speaker, Erik Jong, but also Adriaan, Geuze, Dirk, Sijmons, Erik Luiten, and also Saskia de Wit. And and we hope that it will be a great afternoon. So Saskia will, in the end, take us to the library for the openings ceremony. And after the keynote lecture, we will have 3 reflections by Adriaan, Dirk, and Erik. And of course, we hope also to engage with you as a public to have some questions, discussion with Erik. On a practical note, please switch off your phone to the silent mode. And also, as you have noticed, there are also some photographers in the room taking pictures for on our website and social media. And when you do not consent publication, please let me know afterwards so we can take care of that. Well, the central theme of this afternoon is landscape literacy. And actually, this term is very ambiguous. On the one hand, it refers to the capacity to read and write landscapes. And on the other hand, it refers to theory formation, writing books, collecting books, but also other items like models and maps, etc. That's actually also the central theme of this afternoon. But especially in our master track, we emphasized the different ways on how to read and write landscapes, with a very specific way of understanding the landscape, and at the other hand, also about designing the landscape. And in a way, we try to cultivate design skills throughout the scales, from the garden to the region and vice versa, but also taking into account the history of a place, and also the systemic relationships throughout the scales, from a social and ecological perspective. But as well as also the poetical and the sensorial aspects of place. So these are in a way our fundamental ways of looking at landscapes, and we try to cultivate that in our master track. And over 15 years ago, the work of the master track began with Clemens Steenbergen, Inge Bobbing, and René van der Velde, together with other colleagues, in order to start to shape our curriculum as we have it now. And later, Dirk Sijmons took over and played a pivotal role in the accreditation of our master track. But also other people like Wietse Partijn, the dean at the time, but also Theo van Drunen, Silvo Thijssen, Krik van Ees, and many others played a very important role in the further development of our curriculum as we have it now. And now our master track, we can say, is a big success. So the student numbers are growing, and also the professional world is receiving our students in a very positive way. So our curriculum is thriving, our master track is thriving, you can say. And also still the work is evolving, and the whole landscape architecture team is part of that and plays a crucial role in the further development of our master track. And Erik Luiten plays also an important role in that as a master track coordinator. And also we are very happy to have Adriaan Geuze appointed as a professor to boost our design orientation. And if you like to know more about the development and the history of our master track, I can surely recommend you to download the LAX book, which is freely available to everyone. Yeah, to read more about it, but also to see the results of all of this hard work in the past years. And if you'd like to know the address, please let me know. On the other hand, so that's really about reading and writing the landscape as an important dimension of landscape literacy. But on the other hand, we also have this dimension of knowledge development, theory development. And also there, the section has a very long-lasting reputation in the development of groundbreaking books like Architecture and Landscape, for instance, or the Polder Atlas of the Netherlands, Metropolitan Landscape Architecture, Energy and Landscape, Enclosed Garden, and so on. I think these books really changed the nature of the discipline and influenced and inspired many of us. And indeed, we are not ready yet. In the upcoming years, we would like to further develop the theoretical grounds of our discipline, because we have a long-lasting reputation as a profession, but not so much as a discipline. So therefore, I also consider it to be our obligation to develop also the theoretical basis of our work. And in that regard, themes emerge like landscape-based urbanism, urban ecology design, urban forestry, the garden complex, circular water design, and so a couple of interesting themes more. And you will hear and read more about that in the upcoming years. We want to contribute to a true culture in landscape architecture. And it is very interesting that the French philosopher Dirk suggests actually 5 characteristics of a culture. And the first one is the writing of books and pamphlets. The second, the existence of a specific vocabulary and terminology. The third one, the production of images, drawings, and maps. The fourth one, the production of designed landscapes and gardens. And the fifth one, the existence of a literary tradition. And actually, yeah, and I'm sure Erik will build on these notions. But what's very important, we as a section also want to build on these foundations in terms of collection formation. So therefore, our library plays a pivotal role over the years. And in 2008, our complete library burned down in our old building. And ever since Saskia de Wit took actually the responsibility to start building a new collection. And later on, she will introduce the result of that, of all of this hard work. And over the years, there were also substantial donations from several people, also here in the room. But actually today, or actually this moment, is also dedicated to the big donation of Professor Erik Jong, who provides and offered his whole collection of unique and very special books. And yeah, you will not see all of them this afternoon because we are still processing all these books. But this afternoon there will be this symbolic opening of this renewed library. So we are incredible, happy and grateful for this wonderful gift, and we think this is like a legacy for the upcoming years, not only for us, but also for future generations. So also as a discipline, we owe Erik de Jong very much because he was also the mentor of many of us here in the room. He helped us to finalize together with Dirk Sijmons our PhD thesis, which is also very important for us as a section, but I think also for the discipline of landscape architecture to have, let's say, people with a doctoral education in that regard. But also this long list of books, articles, and papers and pamphlets, which we all know. And I think we will hear more about that later. And especially, of course, about the history of garden and landscape architecture, but also more recently about the relationship between nature and culture. And he has also a very impressive career, you can say, because he has been a professor at the prestigious Bard Graduate Center in New York. He was a research fellow at Dumbarton Oaks, Harvard University, Later, he became a professor in Leiden and in Wageningen. And in the last 12 years, he was the artist chair for culture, landscape, and nature at the University of Amsterdam. So we are very honored and happy to have him here. And without further ado, I would like to invite him to deliver his keynote lecture entitled "The Landscape of Books."
All right, Steffen, thank you for your kind words devoted to myself. And thank you for inviting me to speak. It's lovely to see so many faces, some further afield, some very well known, which gladdens me. But before I begin to speak about what I was invited to do, I would like to extend, of course, my heartfelt congratulations on the 10th year anniversary of the Master Track Landscape Architecture here amidst all the other disciplines at Delft Technical University. That it exists contributes greatly to the professionalization of garden and landscape architecture as an academic discipline. It was the Society of Dutch Garden Architects, founded in 1922, that made the wish for building a library and an academic curriculum for garden and landscape design one of its main strivings. So that is 100 years ago, urged by the changing perspectives for the profession that asked for clear relationships with architecture, urbanism, and landscape development and preservation. This initiative resulted in 1931 in a clear academic program with curriculum on the request of the Dutch government, yet an independent academic study was only to be instated in 1946 at Wageningen with an extra course on garden and landscape architecture organized here at Delft. This slow coming into being shows how context and time shaped the landscape architectural profession. The personal and professional biographies of its students and teachers and practitioners, and the distinct Delft development of landscape architectural knowledge and expertise. And I would think indeed that such academization asks for a literacy that may support the development of theory and practice. This may be old school, I don't know if one likes books. But I see when I look at the recent initiatives of the ministries of our government to re-evaluate the position and meaning of libraries more at large within Dutch society, there is still hope that books will remain among us. Moreover, we all live in small, cramped spaces. Nobody has room to build large libraries. So institutional library seems really quite important. As a library may support and inspire as a collection, but also as a memory storehouse, where next to books, also other collections of knowledge may be consulted, including the internet, and, no doubt, in the future, a responsible use of artificial intelligence. I share literacy with our speaker, Steffen, because I too, of course, have read Raison du Paysage from 1995, the French geographer Augustin Berg, putting forward the thesis that a landscape culture exists. And I repeat, and I have really elaborated a little bit on his points, because I think and feel that they are not quite correct and dare to be amplified. 1, tracts on landscapes are written and published. 2, specific naming, vocabulary and terminology are developed. Images of gardens and landscapes are produced. Gardens and landscapes are made, created, designed, and used. 5th, oral and or written traditions exist. I think the oral is as important as the written. He doesn't mention it. The combination of all these factors turn environment as an object into landscape as a subject, where the roles of experience, perception, projection, and memory are the resultant of man's relationship to his environment. Gardens and landscape constitute a culture that is pluralistic and inclusive, not exclusive. Garden and landscape architecture as a discipline is in this view part of a broad landscape culture, while at the same time able to be the spokesman for its values, to translate, present, and defend that culture through acts of designing and making in conjunction with language, through words, vocabulary, and writing, and speech. Through these latter, gardens and landscape designers reflect on, analyze, read, and interpret function and meanings of gardens and landscapes design and also non-design. Anne Whiston Spurn, in her Language of Landscape from 1998, sees the use of language within the profession of garden and landscape architecture as a laboratory and a library in relation to the visual thinking of photography and drawing and designing. But one could say that it is in language that the separation between the pragmatic and the reflective, so often conflicting in the everyday landscape office, or wherever designs are being made, may be suspended. Writing, after all, offers a translation of experience towards the constructing of a theory for all landscapes beyond direct application. Through language, the garden and landscape designer becomes a spokesman, offering up for dialogue the life and death of places and people, as well as her or his own biography. There he reaches, and she, reflection and expands the knowledge about design and vernacular landscapes, their past, present, and future, their problems and their challenges, their positive impact, as well as their destruction and misuse. The Spur landscape is also language in the way it derives from the core activity of landscape architecture, the shaping from garden to region, to fulfill functions and express meaning, embracing interdisciplinary knowledge of all the fields that touch upon landscape as culture. From anthropology, geography, ecology, and technology to history, art, history, literature, linguistics, and more. These shape garden and landscape language into a powerful, wide-ranging tool, as its word may be ambiguous, metaphoric, and paradoxical, but also poetic, rhetorical, and polemical. Expounding and explaining ideas, theories, culture, or concepts, the different languages of garden and landscape architecture and landscape at large represent a moral category of how humans think, feel, and act. Our time of the Anthropocene, this human epoch, requires such new thinking, a new language, and thus also an important rereading of history and the present. It is not without reason that Martin Krupinski in Hanover tried to propose to use the word "landscape" instead of landscape, wanting to reflect a new relationship of man towards his environment in the Anthropocene. As a pair, the words nature and culture expressed for Donna Haraway, still so much fundamental dualism and oppositional thinking from which so much of our present-day problems in the world were born, that she suggests use the word nature culture, written as one word instead. Hello, Saeed, welcome. Suggesting an effacing of boundaries, typically for the hybrid, that the Anthropocene is producing. Now, I'm not a designer, but a historian, but I'm also part of garden and landscape culture, in that sense. And where my greatest interest is the history of garden and landscape architecture as a design and cultural discipline in conjunction with human-nature relationships. I discovered this field while still a student in architectural history at Utrecht University in 1979. Garden and landscape history then was not an accepted field within the humanities. It was deemed nature, not culture, a good example of academic oppositional thinking. But it was reading David Coffin's book on the Villa d'Este from 1960 and 1980, I encountered a study that fused architectural, landscape, garden, and cultural history into one offering the actual villa landscape together with its documents, texts, images, for interpretation. I visited David Coffin in Princeton in 1981. He received me, as Americans do, generously, took me to lunch, and stimulated to pursue my interest, and which he continued to do so during the rest of his life, right into it. His thesis was that the humanities should provide for an important place of the study of garden and landscape architecture, as man's handling of garden, landscape, and nature is essentially a human act. Gardens and landscapes are an extension of one another. They both represent essential parts of the gradients of our environment. Steffen, on the spot, made instantaneously an appointment for me with Betty McDougall, then head of Garden and Landscape Studies at Oaks, a Harvard research institution in Washington, D.C. There, the basis of garden and landscape history was revealed to me in the library and rare book room, and of course also in the garden that surrounds this wonderful place. Ever since that visit, Oaks has remained a place of study and inspiration, as it stimulates, with other colleagues, the literacy in the fields of garden and landscape in the presence of primary sources and secondary literature. And above all, in its magnificent series of publications made from their symposia, 47 in all, till the present, still growing and reflecting the many changes the field has undergone from garden to landscape, from landscape to gardens, posing new questions and developing new perspectives. I have been much fortunate to be able to stay there on different fellowships and have been for many years a senior Harvard fellow, allowing me to come and go as I please and partake in the organization of its symposia. Under the inspiring guidance of Michel Conant, we discussed and studied gardens, designed landscapes and landscapes from many parts of the world as places of contested meanings, and the writing of their history as a discipline of contested purposes. As all these are part of cultural and social change, imbued with political meaning and hegemonic attitudes of Western culture. Oaks, in my time, also started to collect modern garden and landscape architectural designs as part of the library, by Patricia Johansson, then Ada Suus, Mario Chetna, for example, thus strengthening the dialogue between contemporary design and history as an important new addition to a mostly historic field. Since then, I have pursued my teaching and research with the help of a growing number of colleagues in the US and Europe, where in different disciplines, garden and landscape history over the past 40 years was steadily developing into a serious field at academic design institutions, the humanities, and beyond. But I here gratefully acknowledge their contribution to my development as both older and contemporary garden and landscape architecture came into my vision, Western and non-Western. In the recent 40 years that landscape architecture became itself an ever more expanded field, so the field of landscape architectural history has broadened out immensely to philosophies of nature and botany, to environmental issues and geography, to placemaking. The role of social values, questions of war, health, gender, but also injustice and segregation, landscape heritage, and identity. A development that poses at present many questions of how garden and landscape architectural history really should be taught, as the field is now as wide and open as landscape itself. How to master it through our own literacy, how to recast, then rewire and rewrite our understanding of history at the present in the same breath. Being open to this development, my own library grew. These are the books still to come. The rest is in 40 boxes here at Delft. They will come slowly. My library mirrors my own professional and personal development, as I think all our libraries do. I am not a designer, so my book collection is specific. It consists of source books in the sense of original and seminal texts and treatises that belong to the history and theory of garden and landscape architecture from the 16th to the 21st century. There are studies of a more theoretical kind written on gardens, landscapes, and landscape architecture, place, nature, aesthetics, experience, followed by general and thematic studies and monographs on places, objects, designs, themes, and topologies. Its heritage in the US, most countries in Europe, also Turkey, the Middle East, China, and Japan, all places where I have also taught or exchanged and acquired and received books as gifts. A library continually renews itself if one tries to remain open to essential developments. There is at present an exponential rise of studies on the Anthropocene, climate change, biophilia, regeneration, multi-species thinking and rights of nature, urban forestry, dark ecology, soil, earth, and microbes. And these lead to ask different questions to our gardens and landscapes, their history, and the need to reread and re-understand and re-comment it for the benefit of our own time. These new approaches with our human epoch, the Anthropocene, also challenge the way academia works, and face disciplinary boundaries, urging us to renew our own language and ideas. It is well to remember that garden and landscape literacy also exists in other cultures, like China, Japan, and the Islamic world. And these past years of growing interest to me, the non-written traditions in Africa, South American, and US indigenous landscapes. These belong to the most fascinating finds, an upcoming large field that has to do with emancipation and seeking new identities and defending values that elsewhere in the world are threatened. A particular collection of my library is formed by quite something else. It is also a collection of paper. They are Japanese landscape paintings. Their image, a continuous source of understanding and fascination in their expression of the essentials of mist, mountain, field, tree, flora, and fauna, and the human position. They remind me that not everything can be expressed through and in words. History is a pursuit in itself, and rarely designers are historians and vice versa. Yet history is perhaps not without its function for designer. It may fuel insights and understanding. Literacy and reading landscapes on field excursions, for example, allows us to stand back and reflect, discuss, and connect with the present. While in designing places, the layers of history are never far away and demand an approach and understanding. When initiatives for the professionalization of garden landscape architecture in this country arose 100 years ago, history was used to hold up a critical mirror to contemporary situations. The book collection and archives collected by landscape architect L.A. Springer in Wageningen are a result of such a positioning. It is a collection that does not exist in Delft, for example. Yet, writing at present for a book on the founding fathers of the Dutch Society for Garden and Landscape Architecture, it's remarkable to see how much informed literacy about historical and then contemporary views on design, architecture, and urbanism and landscape beauty and preservation in an international context fueled the thinking and writing and speaking about the profession and the wishes for that profession. But as it now stands for me, history yields, first of all, most of all, trans-historical themes. This is to say, one should not remain with history and within the confines of history and its fascination, so history as heritage only. Trans-historical themes illuminate the position of the discipline as a field of knowledge and practice. by pointing to essential values that perhaps have always been there, but in each period take on a different representation, as here expressed by Dorothy Lynn. So history must in some way matter to any designer, as it involves reflecting about the central processes and how one is connected to others in the field internally and externally, with the world at large and in line with the past predecessors. Next to our intellect, history may also touch upon feeling, intuition, and imagination. I was able to observe that closely during the inspiring period I guided landscape architecture PhDs here in Delft and in Wageningen and at my own university. Each of these studies, projects of increased new academic literature, of academic literacy, almost the new treatises of our time, while firmly positioned in the present, also pose fundamental questions to historical objects and processes, and the discipline itself to arrive at new understandings, define important new themes, discovering also our existing methods of design analysis could be enriched by new formulation or new technological representation. Experience in almost all of these studies was accessed as something that was not part of the existing Delft or Wageningen design analysis. And in that sense, they were renewed and renewing. As much as other dissertation looked into drawings and why architects and landscape architects really speak so little about what is so essential in their discipline, which is time. So now that I have retired from regular teaching, a different phase in my own biography has arrived. Much apter than pension, which is about money, retirement allows one in the most positive sense to retreat as an inward movement, bringing a different attention to oneself and the place where one finds oneself, also as a spiritual being. Landscape, after all, also regards inner landscape. More distance creates space, replacing the linear passage of time with its opposition between work and leisure, and gives way for what philosopher Joke Hermsen calls deep time, a time that leads to free inspiration, creativity, and insight, we hope. Retreats in many cultural contexts almost always take place in nature. In my own case, offered by two gardens that I tend. This one in an urban situation in Overveen near Haarlem, and the other one in the fields of the north. Both are landscape extension of my library landscape. Retreating also means shedding, letting go, and it is in this space that the decision came up to donate my library to landscape architecture at this university, and a part of it has arrived here now. Delft landscape architecture has been generous to me with its insight, PhD, students, exchange, and project. So I am happy that my offer was accepted after Saskia de Wit came, looked, observed, and flew. So it is with gladness that I hand her over to a next generation in the recognition that today's students may be tomorrow's guiding force. So I can only hope that library collections of landscape architects and designers with their own specific character may in the future strengthen this library of landscapes, continuing to build a treasure house of literacy in different fields of landscape culture, from the universal to the invented, from design to art to process to systemic. Each generation of garden and landscape designers and historians have their own strategy, rhetoric, and justification of the profession. And books may help us to remember, value, and re-evaluate the field and one's own position. But having said this, I must acknowledge as a historian that the large body of texts that make up a theory of Western European and American gardens and designed landscapes represent a tradition that is hardly known and is not read at all How otherwise could we forget that in using landscape architecture to denominate the profession, garden is so often omitted as a lesser category? Yet, and here perhaps the historian may come in handy to shed another light, which forms the second part of my presentation. From Pietro de Crescenzi's Ruralia Commodoro, early 14th century, to the left, to Diana Balmori's Landscape Manifesto from 2010, there is a whole tradition of manuscripts and books with theories of gardens and landscapes that form together the fundament of the design discipline now called landscape architecture. Both books approach garden and landscape from wide angles. The 14th century Bolognese lawyer designed in his book for the first time a typology of landscapes by defining an environment that consists of agriculture, vineyards, tree and fruit growing, kitchen and herb gardens, meadows, pleasure gardens, woods, animals, and a calendar for seasonal work involving craft, tools, and technology. It's quite a modern book, in fact. You wouldn't expect it. The text, popular far into the 17th century through illuminated manuscript and printed books, offers a compendium of classical and medieval knowledge and instructions for running a household economy. It describes, specifies, and codifies ideas, techniques, and procedures based on proven traditional practice. Landscape architect Balmori, born 1932, died 2016, whom I had the fortune to know very well, wrote a vision for urban landscapes. She formulates propositions that integrate urban ecology, environmental conservation, and green building techniques to form a manifesto. Building a framework supported by illustrations, she explains new phenomena in answer to cultural and social change, and she constructs a disruptive change of paradigms in the world of design and politics. As different as the agendas of these two books are, both authors represent two main approaches within garden and landscape architectural theory. De Crescenzi is inductive, building theory by generalizing observation and practice. Balmori is deductive, establishing first principles, wording propositions to test and apply. Both authors nurture a perspective that is essentially and always situational. How to create healthy, appealing, and sustainable garden landscapes as part of human and non-human habitation is what they hold up to their readers, offering guidelines, models, and ways of considering. Between these two books lays a whole rich history of garden and landscape design thinking, spanning almost more than 600 years. Swaffield, in his theory in landscape architecture for mentions how recent writings have wondered if perhaps the landscape architectural profession lacks a coherent body of theoretical knowledge. This inquiry after theory was stimulated by resistance to the dominant agenda of 20th century architectural and urban modernism. And to support their position, landscape designers have thought, as Elizabeth Meyer has shown, confirmation in the 18th century, when nature and landscape stood central in design practice. Theoretical concepts of the beautiful, picturesque, and sublime still form its heritage, albeit in present-day practice reduced to individual, and not so much in their original form as experiential categories. Such projection into a preferred period in history, however, denies us to understand the at least more than several hundreds year-long historical development of garden and landscape theory, its themes and concerns. This rich tradition of gardens and landscape treatises amounts to a substantial genre of books, manuscripts, and articles in journals. And journals originated as early as the late 18th century. It offers a vast, although intertextual dialogue and words and illustration between art and nature as the basis for landscape design. Ideas and practices were disseminated through translations and became adapted to other contexts. Their place in private, institutional, or national libraries tell us much about the reception of the theories by individual and society. During the research for the present exhibition in the Austrian National Library in Vienna, Von Garten und Menschen, gestaltete Naturkunst und Landschaftsarchitektur. So that is an exhibition of gardens and people, designed nature, art and landscape architecture in the most wonderful library that you may ever visit, which is in the heart of Vienna. It showed during those preparations that the holdings of this library, the literacy on gardens and landscape design in Austria for a long time was restricted to books in German and French. English was not read, so not accessible. So that makes us realize that reception of landscape literature is a field of research in its own. The genre of garden and landscape treatises originates in the late 16th century in husbandry and almanac literature popular since classical antiquity. It was in the books by Watteau, Cato, Columella that knowledge was found on landscape, site and siting, settlement, agriculture, gardens, trees, forests, plants, rivers, water sources, soil, elements, and climate. These offered not only the tradition of practice, but also a spiritual celebration of landscape and nature, especially represented in Virgil's Georgic. This wide array of topics was continuously developed, adapted, and changed according to time, place, and culture. For ideas to be understood and shared, treatises develop a rhetoric and vocabulary of their own, to which illustrations add visual models, inventions, or solutions, helping to explain the text. Garden and landscape theories in this longue durée formulate principles and strategies relating to practical design processes, and these range from the important issues on siting to those of scale, accessibility, views, and the relation to architecture. The third nature of the garden, being based on cultural landscape and wilderness, always falls into those natures of agriculture as a second nature and wilderness as first nature, and requires views on the regular and irregular, on order and chaos, on uniformity and variety. Nature and art become central concepts throughout all garden treatises. You can see them here depicted to the left and the right of this illustrated statement in Abbé de Valmont, Curiosities of Nature and Art. The presentation and representation of nature and landscape topography through form, aesthetics, material, technology, and use, time and again requires observation, study, and understanding. How may nature be translated, imitated, or improved? Garden and landscape theories continuously seeks man's approach to the materiality of site, place, and region, and inquires after essences of nature like earth and soil, water, geology, trees, plants, animals, light and color. The garden is almost always the starting point and a stepping stone towards intervention in the wider landscape, as the wider landscape is also brought back into garden. Result of this approach is the invention of typology of line and space, like avenue, path, road, street, root, grove, orchard, meadow, vegetable garden or garden, park and square, be they private or public. Or they speak about the relationship to water, canal, fountain, pond, lake, cascade, hydraulics, water ecosystem, bridge, aqueduct, or earth, terrace, relief, hill, wasteland, and build structures and technology, house, pavilion, bridge, wall, urban systems, the making of infrastructure. The place of profit, the food garden, the orchard, next to that of ornament, the pleasure garden. These have throughout offered essential points for discussion and review. The genre offers ideas in all these centuries about the role of designed landscapes for mental, emotional, and physical health, hygiene through addressing all the senses, reason, feeling, and imagination, by looking into the role of the eye and perception, and to our sensibility for color, light, and atmosphere. and these at the same time formulate standards for appropriateness, character, beauty, and taste. Ideas start reflecting more intently on issues regarding class and society, urban environment and infrastructure from the 19th century onwards, and discover how the ethical and political bear on garden and landscape design. As contexts change, garden and landscape design theory continues to add new insights and original solution to its body of knowledge so that others may build on them in the future. Garden and landscape theory speak early on of the status of gardener and designer, and they show us how the profession of garden and landscape architects evolved. Early requirements in the literature demanded knowledge of mathematics, surveying, engineering and perspective, botany and horticulture, art and philosophy, thus revealing a wide range of other disciplines and skills necessary for the projection and making of garden and landscape. I'll give you an early example. It's one of the earliest illustrated treatises from 1593, done by Hans Buchnelder, who was a gardener to Rudolf II in Prague. His books were called Art Books on Useful Gardening and contain texts and drawings. In the drawings, he attempts to show his mastery of perspective, order, and harmony. The perspective, the new invention of his time. And so now he tried to construct spaces drawn on paper. This was a totally new thing for a gardener to do, while his writing is based on his reading of Le Crescenzi's text. Well, it's to be wondered about because not all gardeners were able to read in this period. But they written in German. So we see a gardener using text and drawing to express his invention, his ability to invent beyond garden craft. I'll contrast this with more than 100 years later when Desire-Jarvie, in his theory and practice of gardening in 1709, offers the projection of a garden on soil, which you see to the left of this image, with a design to one drawn on paper, which you see to the right. So here, a paradigmatic change is visualized, that of hands-on gardening into design as a conceptual, autonomous activity. It illustrates the close relationship between practice and theory, but also their very different position regarding the rise of the specialized profession of the designer from then onwards. The 18th century saw garden design admitted to the official system of the arts. Becoming the sister art of poetry and painting, theory was never more popular in imbuing landscape architecture with literary quality, proving to us that the inspiration for landscape designs may be found in the other arts. Landscape gardener was the title poet William Shenstone introduced at the end of the 18th century for garden designers. It was a new term. And Humphrey Ratcliffe, as you can see here, used it on his visiting card, also used as an ex libris in his books. Architecture and surveyor Jean-Marie Morel in Paris, author of the Théorie des Jardins in Paris, 1776, coined the term architecte paysagiste, so landscape architect, referring to the essential combination of spatial design with landscape painting, and doing so reflecting the new way of designing landscapes at the École des Ponts et Chaussées in Paris. And you see an example in the student drawing to the right, enlarging the scale of design for gardens. It was Frederick Law Olmsted who introduced Morel's concept as landscape architecture to America after returning from Paris in 1860. Although he wrote, and I find it quite humorous, Olmsted wrote that, and I quote, "Landscape is not a good word, architecture is not, the combination is not, and gardening is worse." End of quote. So you see the struggle in these books and publications to find the right denomination for the activities of the field that we now accept as landscape architecture. Since its beginning as a knowledge and thinking system, garden and landscape architectural theory has made use of and originated within other disciplines. Garden writers Charles Etienne and Liebo were 16th century physicians, so doctors. Jan van der Groen and André Mollet and Jean-Baptiste de la Quinténie were gardeners, writing. The latter also a lawyer and an agronome. In the 17th century, Vincenzo Camozzi and Joseph Furtenbach were architects, while Olivier de Serres, Jacques Boisseau, Jean Yvelin, and Antoine Désiré d'Argentville were laymen. The 18th century sees literary men like Alexander Pope, William Shenstone, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, next to philosophers like Joseph Addison and Christian A. Lawrence Hirschfeld as innovators of garden and landscape theory. Thomas Whately, William Gilpin, and Vidal Price were laymen too, who exerted profound influence. But then in the 19th century, with the rising of the profession, garden and landscape theory is almost exclusively written by landscape architects and garden architects. Humphrey Repton, Steph Meyer, Alphonse, and many more, thus affirming the rise of the profession and trying to codify design in language and image, as was also done in the Prussian Linné School in Berlin. Acknowledging the growing role of urban life, John Claudius Luiten was revolutionary in advocating gardens and landscapes for a suburban middle-class public. His many publications democratized garden and landscape theory, also in text and image. And it is in this period that also the first women's voices are heard in print, those of Jane Loudon and Louisa Johnston in America. Frederick Law Olmsted, his collected writings now in your library on the shelf, see, and Charles Eliot in Boston, they stand for me as pioneering pinnacles of literacy and landscape architecture, with their writings on the principles of regional planning, on a naturalistic systems approach to landscape architecture, and its role for what they have called the metropolitan network and laying the groundwork for nature conservancy across the world. You see that the term metropolitan dates from more than a century ago. They also testify their deep awareness of the political meaning of landscape for social justice and health. One of the volumes by Olmsted is devoted to his text on slavery. Theories by late 19th and early 20th century architects like John Dando Seding, Reginald Bloomfield, and Thomas Mawson defined garden and landscape design as architecture and as a civic, public art, emphasizing the rising role of urban landscape and thus contributing to an awareness that landscape design must function on an expanded landscape and urban scale. It also resulted in the Netherlands in an increased production of statements and pamphlets and manifestos on the goals of garden and landscape architecture and its teaching. 20th century writers have tried to embrace holistic views on landscape architecture, like Christopher Tillett, Garrett Ekbo, Landscapes for Living, or Brenda Colvin, Sylvia Crow, magnificent women writers in England, or Ayn McHarg, Dieter Kinas, Gilles Clément, Christophe Giraud, Günter Vogt, Dirk Sijmons, to name a Dutch among them, of the same international stature. These I only suggest as authors from my own readings and fascination. In their writings, each in their own way, try to emphasize garden and landscape architecture as an integral discipline. In doing so, they harbored different instrumental, interpretive, and/or critical positions dictated by social context to emphasize the unique role landscape architecture must play in the future of smaller, larger, and regional contemporary landscapes and metropolitan areas, connecting them to the writers before them, enclosing existing and opening new perspectives. It is in this way that present garden and landscape architecture lays embedded in a long, honorable, often invisible, unread, and is also unknown, but yet existing tradition, and finds its roots in many disciplines, even though we feel its present professional dimension was invented in the 20th century. Both as a vision and a practice, the pluriform and diverse character of garden and landscape theory is therefore, in my view, not a sign of its weakness, but it shows its true strength and enduring value for our time. It is through being able to hold books with text and images in our hands that we may follow the historic and contemporary adventure that is garden and landscape architecture, allowing us knowledge, insight, understanding, reflection, and inspiration to come to us, and perhaps some wisdom. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Erik. So, questions from the, because there's so much to digest, but yeah, in the end of the day, it's also about the question, what does books mean to you? What did they mean in your professional development? So maybe you have some questions or ideas about it.
I have one question to Erik. Why is there a book on a kabouter in your library?
Midgets. Well, it's the subject of a book I'm writing. Yes, I'm fascinated by garden gnomes because they embody the change from classical knowledge like floras and Demeters and the classical gods of the Roman period into more national earthbound figures. They of course come from fairy tales, and they become, I think, par excellence, a kind of mirror for ourselves, because they care for landscapes and nature, like the tomten in the northern Swedish tradition, who wakes up at night when we sleep and takes care of things that are amiss in the landscape or with animals. So I think this tiny figure reveals an interesting culture that mirrors a lot of our concerns, and could be a kind of admonition to elevate care to a higher level.
Well, thanks a lot.
And they're funny. You know that there is a lot of misunderstanding with garden gnomes. You have a French Liberation Front for garden gnomes. And these are people that steal garden gnomes from private gardens and bring them to the forest, which is a total misunderstanding, because a garden gnome is not a forest gnome, you know. So be aware. Mind you. Anyway.
Well, some other comments.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Erik, you know our program, our master track program, what we teach, and of course you have contact with few students, mainly in the graduation course. But what would you think about the lecture you just gave and all the knowledge which is behind there, on also history and development of the profession, etc.? Do you think something like that, lecture series of it, is missing in the curriculum?
Yeah, well, if you ask me as a historian, yeah, I think it could be very interesting, provided that it is not a historic course, but that it is a history course that is being viewed from the present, so that it finds this connection. There is a book coming out on how to teach garden and landscape history, especially to designers. It's now being put together in England. And different people have given different ideas about it. It depends. It could be I would prefer it not to be chronological. but I would prefer it to be thematic and not do it, I think, only about design, but also the absence of design. I mean, so state of the art of where we are, not so easy to do, but not impossible. And especially if students would participate by taking themes on their own and trying to write and especially speak about them or draw them out, or in any creative action that would inspire them, or by which they would be inspired by this so-called historic material. But you see, if you think in trans-historical terms, history disappears, which I like, as I am going to disappear. I like this, the movement that I'm going through myself, that history as history is not enough anymore for me. It's there must be a dynamic in that concept of the themes that history yields that speak to us and that are important for designers and other people. Also, especially in the field of heritage. Heritage is a closed system, I feel, and it is too little alive and confronting itself with such themes. It might change it.
Nice topics to discuss, I would say.
So yes, the answer is yes.
Very much.
And another course to the students. All right.
Personal question. I hope you don't mind. Because you mentioned that you are going now to like more spiritual path, and that it was necessary to let go. So I wonder, what is the role of these literacies? What is the role of the books in such a path? And how important is to let go?
Well, books, of course, remain important. I mean, reading is an activity that you can almost not unlearn, as much as I also discovered that in a very different way than I used to do. Writing can somehow not be unlearned, but it can be done in a very different way. So I think I've kind of started writing different ways and also on different topics. Yeah, I think it's important to let go and not hold on to one's own history. But this is a very personal question indeed. If one has been very ill, has lost people in your surroundings, and one's personal life has changed through all these dimensions. One goes in retirement and all the colleagues and the students are suddenly gone, and then also in a period of COVID, so you say goodbye to people that you haven't seen for a year. That is a very peculiar experience that confronts you with oneself. But it is serious, but it is also liberating. So to let go, I experienced when Saskia and René and Reinhard Rutte came to fetch the first 40 boxes of books. When they were gone, I felt so liberated. I was so happy. Happy for myself, but also happy for the position that they could start fulfilling. And when the rest of the library comes, of course, everything becomes complete, and the weaker parts and the stronger parts form a whole, which is also important. These exist also. So that is a sense of liberation, not holding on to try to find that essence. And for the literacy, it is in writing and perhaps in speaking, trying to come to a certain essence of things, shared all the impulses from outside, to rethink and to, yeah, I don't know if that is an answer.
A very historic question. I could take time, not landscape today. So I really very fascinating that in 17th century in Netherlands there are many gardens, and also this very rich estate, they all have own garden. But and then is it was a sort of occasion because, and how these people, because nowadays we couldn't see most of them because maintenance is very expensive. And how these people, when they lay out these gardens, did they not aware that it's impossible to maintain them? How it's
Well, you asked a question after maintenance of historic designs. Well, labor was cheap. So that is why it could be done. That is and how it could be done intensively. And you see that when labor becomes more expensive, one of the reasons that the landscape movement starts has to do with that labor intensity and with the ruinous conditions of many of these architectural gardens during the 18th century, and that there was only one way to replace them, and that was by reducing that intensity. But no, if you have a lot of people that work for you, it's possible. It is still possible for many people who have money to pay workers.
At what point did you see your library as a library? Because I have 3 shelves with everything garden and design, but I see it as my little library. But when did you see yours as?
When I had to build bookcases and order them, and started lending books to people. I do not know how many books I've lent because they were not available in Dutch library. Then you also start realizing that you have something that does not exist elsewhere.
Well, then I maybe have a question for you regarding the role the library can play, or the potential it can play in the further development of our master track of our section. Because it's of course very nice to have such a wealthy and rich library, but can you elaborate a little bit more on how it can serve as a vehicle to develop our discipline, and especially here in Delft?
Well, that depends. Saskia is developing an approach and a philosophy. And I think it could be interesting for designers to give parts of their libraries to enrich this library so that it becomes filled with from different perspectives and different corners to form a whole. So that there is a survey and an overview of writings about this field, both secondary, but perhaps also, but also primary sources. And I think it should somehow find a place within teaching and research by actively stimulating to read certain books. I've taught courses in New York about source books in landscape architecture starting in the 20th and the 21st century and then going backwards, and making a kind of anthology of texts and what was important and what was not important, what was simply important or not. So that it becomes confrontational with the way how people in the field have thought and written, and about what and how these books look, and the relationship with illustrations and text and bindings. And there is a whole world to explore that could be part of the seminar, part of the seminar that also integrates design. I think there are quite a few possibilities to bringing these books into teaching, and of course stimulate students to look around. You have open stacks, which I think is wonderful, because you can stand in front of books, you can take them out, you can hold them in your hand, you don't have to order them and wait until they arrive. So that is, for me, that is very inspirational, this direct confrontation with the book.
So it's not about collecting, it's also about providing perspectives and inspire people, and just by browsing.
Yes, but you do that through collecting. That is why you collect. That is somehow how you. There is also something very funny in collecting, because when you feel that books are present in your library, you almost, even without having read them, you have some kind of a feeling, I have always access to what is in them. And then it starts to work, because as soon as you start writing or doing research or making an essay, you walk to these books and you open them and you start reading. So it's a very mysterious way of production. But the presence of books in itself is already, can be very inspiring.
Thank you very much. Please give him a hand. Well, then we arrive at the next point of our, let's say, of our event. And I asked 3 people to reflect on the role books played in their personal development and in their life. And the first person I would like to invite is Adriaan Geuze. Of course, we know him as the director and the founder of the West 8, but also recently he became a professor of landscape architecture. Adriaan, the floor is yours.
I had hoped for a table to sit because I feel the table is better for this 5 minutes. We owe you so much. I don't want to have intellectual reflection. I only want to participate in the event, to contribute. I was born with a straw hat in a family of engineers, land makers, and unfortunately, I took the path of the Polytech University, which is not the straw hat world. So I became more or less an engineer and obsessed, also a practitioner. And before I knew, I arrived because I had aspirations to be a little bit outside of Holland as well. I figured out I landed in a world of commerce, competition, bad behavior, the opposite of a slow world, the opposite of straw hat, and a very nasty, vulgar, banal reality. And so in a certain way, we as practitioners, we have to be aware that that is a sort of biotope. It's part of the ecosystem of landscape architecture as well. I think in my first year, I already recognized that type of too hard, too big, too shallow. And from year 1 or 2, I was 1 day a week at the university, which I consider your world, Erik, the world of the slow, the world of the reading, the chapel, the reflection, the library. It is a paradise, which is for landscape architecture pretty relevant because there are so many other domains. Designing is a very interesting medium, and I like it, but it doesn't work if you don't have the root system which belongs to landscape architect DNA. Later, I started an orchard with mulberries. This year is the first time I made like 12 kilograms of marmalade jam mulberry, which is it's a new record. So I will hand you all a jar. The medium of, let's say, the medium of writing, we owe you guys so much. You are a teacher in, let's say, send us to the library, give us the books, and we can't live without, let's say, the frame of the writers, the frame of the poets, frame of the artists. Without these, we cannot understand the world. So therefore, Erik, I'm extraordinarily impressed that you share, and it's a sort of, you use the word fulfilling, and I think it is, we in Delft, we hardly understand the weight and the relevance of that, that you share with us yourself, the way you read this interesting profession and history. Okay. I thought about many books, but very relevant for today's show is Tom Wolfe. I was reading this when I was young. Bonfire of Vanity, from Bauhaus to Our House. which was the first time I wrote about, sarcasm, about, it's not like, architecture, urban design is, which we all share. We love it. We are so mellow and we are so romantic and silly. But it flipped the other way around, and then not so. I think he was inspired by this sort of collection of articles or crits or a smaller essays by Gert Komrij, Het Boze Oog, which more or less for me is also in Amsterdam, of course, but it is very relevant way to look at architecture. It's not necessarily about landscape architecture. But so this is for me also, I hope to find some of that in your libraries. I don't know. So, the immoral, the irony, the sensitive, the silly. Okay, for today, and that's where I would like to take you as, it's not a homage, but as a contribution to follow a little bit your path, your track. A small poem which is called Handhaven, and there is an option, so it is a sort of reflection in combination with you're very pessimistic, no? Are you? No. So the reflection is very in your, you cannot find words in the conclusion, and we do this together. If you have you have to speak Dutch, of course. But it should be on the slow, as you know, it's the slow rhythm. It's more like that than that you read it like a book. So, but we do this together, and then I will do handhaven. I do it in Dutch, unfortunately. Onder jouw lage wolken, ruisdaals, luchten en verlangen en gezelregens horizontaal. En op jouw hoge kruinen, waar de zweepwind koud doet rillen, het wrakhout van geschiedenis fataal. In jouw zinken golven, het door de maan beheerst getijde dat stroomt en springt, garnalen, bloed en energie. Uit jouw machtige delta die zuinige mensen schiep, miserend in wisselvalligheid. Dit gaat natuurlijk over het niet begrijpen van je eigen omgeving, maar wel daarvan houden. Dan doen we samen. Hier ben ik vandaan. Rooswilte haring. Lekker Nederland. Door jouw schorren en opgeslipte platen in euforie getrokken lijnen, gestrafte golven. Tot jouw kim, nieuwe aarde, dammen, dijken, rijken, atletische bruggen, geknipte linten aan kilometerpalen. Niets cadeau. Van jouw zeevloer, groots verkabeld, land getergd, door kleinhartigheid aanhoudend. Naar jouw landmeters, de afgepaste orde der preciezen, waar de maatmeters het maaiveld koesteren in monnikschap. Dat wil ik proberen. Slow beat, hè, Erik, slow beat. Aanmatigend haarklovers venijn. En AP. Zal ik gelijk zijn? Ingepolderd. Tegen jouw stekend zwenkgras, helmgras. Nee, tegen jouw stekend zwenkend helmgras, mijn eerste neuk. Spuitzand, verwaaide fleurs, duindorens oranje-witte bes. Aan jouw verse vloedlijn, valse snavels, messchelpen en kinderen bloot, die bang voor jouw bulderbranding die hun zandkastelen sloot. Zoveel gulle schoonheid. Ondanks jouw ribbelstranden, waarover mosselzwarte palenrijen wandelen in zee, toch nooit dankbaar. Gaat hij weer? Met microfoon. Mens en daad onontkoombaar ongeprezen. Zal ik steeds gedogen? Vraagteken. Hou ik dit vol? Oké, kom er dichterbij door de. Nee, de wind jouw trage merwede, die kolken draait aan basalte kribben, geurt de parfum van slik en diesel, de leeuwerik jubelzangt. Boven jouw uiterwaard, fluweel meigras, paardenbloemen, gele treinen, plastic in het prikkeldraad. In jouw winterpolders, pruitkool, klei gekamd en ijzer, warme tijen gestolen bij het bevroren gemaal. Maar over jouw platland, dat geen pausen duldt, geen tirannen, het gewone koester, waait gemene middelmaat. Een beetje vloegende taal, dat is niet veel ongeveer. Nee, dan gaat hij weer. Langzaam. Langzaam communiceren als en in taal. Romans gelijk. Dat heel goed. Die doet de laatste, we zijn nu het laatste couplet en dan de laatste reflectie. Die moet Saskia in de microfoon. Uit jouw nevelweilanden, dagen geboren, nieuw en hoopvol met tegenlicht schel, loeit mastreclame. Lelijke leugens gespiegeld tussen jouw stengelriet. Ontheiligde sloten, geknakte liefde, melancholie, pijlkruid en zeggen. Langs jouw bermen, geil van fluitenkruid, verstoppen eenden voor kassen, hallen en 1000 buitenwijken, onverschillig. Achter jouw populieren, ik zeg het fout, onverschillig achter jouw populieren, zachthout somberend, schaduwenlang vanwege jouw volk, trots nog schaamte. Ik heb je wilgen geknapknold tot vuisten behandeld. We owe you so much.
Well, then I would like to invite Dirk Sijmons, which is a retired professor of landscape architecture, as well as founder and former director of HNS Landscape Architects. Okay, back to English, I'm afraid. Thank you, Adriaan. And thank you, Erik, for your generous gift. A whole library to immerse ourselves in and to be inspired by. It will be instrumental, I'm sure, for the students to rediscover the joy of reading and the importance of books. Hello? Reading, as we all know, is more than looking things up on the internet. All the books of Erik that Erik showed are not available on the internet. Books can be formative for the aspiring young professional. And in the 7 minutes, I'd like to cram in the recommendation for 5 books for the extension of the library. And the first book, allow me a little bragging, is about delineating and broadening of landscape architecture. In 1998, I wrote the first book in the history of printing, I'm not exaggerating, where the name of the publisher and the title of the book construct a working algorithm. Architectura plus natura, being the name of the publisher, equals landscape, and that's the title of the book. It's a book from the emancipatory period of landscape architecture, and you can see it. It is a sort of blazing, functionalistic book, trying to show that every cycle process can be seduced in making landscape, or at least
add a meaningful contribution to our cultural landscape. And it is going from urbanization to agriculture development, to infrastructure, to electricity production, to nature development, to leisure, etc. For me, it was a programmatic book. Most of the subjects touched in the book and identified in the book were later researched and conquered for landscape architecture as a field. The second book, as this one, and I think most of you will know it, turns the question around in is landscape ... question mark. It is a 2016 book by Garrett Doherty and Charles Waldheim from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. It deals with all the angles one could take in defining what landscape is. The book offers, let's say, a critical but also multifocal answer on the question that Garrett Doherty posed in the mid-80s. Is landscape architecture. And it does so by 14 illustrated short essays that take you into a myriad of different answers to the original question. Is landscape photography? Is it painting? Is it philosophy? Is it planning? Or is landscape ecology? That's an impressive contribution by Nina Marie Lister, by the way. Or is it infrastructure? We are in Harvard, so that's, of course, by Pierre Berlage. Or is it history? Or is landscape basically just gardening? Or is landscape poetry? Adriaan, I think I shall never see a poem as beautiful as a tree. Reading these essays on the identity of landscape will make you think. And thinking broadens what landscape is and what it yet might become by the agency of design. The third book, where's my third book, is about this one. The third book is all about how attitudes and shifting worldviews can influence the course and the content of the profession as a whole. Is that dangerous? Well, Defiant Earth is a 2017 book by Australian philosopher Clive Hamilton. And it is a book for our dangerous world. It shows that most of the most urgent transition that we are facing as designers might very well be the transition of the way of viewing the world, seeing the world. Hamilton constructs a fourfold typology of worldviews towards the Anthropocene condition: denialism, eco-modernism, post-humanism, and a new sort of anthropocentrism, aptly called anthropocentrism 2.0. These worldviews might just be read as four escape routes from the traditional modernism and its belief in progress, where we, in my opinion, need to get rid of. All four offer a different diagnosis of the environmental situation. Thus, different kinds of projects will emerge from them, and gradually will bring a different kind of our profession to the foreground. But all this book wisdom is not bringing you any closer to the core of the matter, how to design. The fourth book, that's this one. The fourth book pivots around this question just by asking. The death of Michael Sorkin, the famous architecture critic who compiled the list of 250 things an architect should know, brought Cannon to the idea that as an homage to his teacher, the compiling of 250 statements from landscape practitioners. I first asked 50 colleagues from all over the world, each to write 5 short statements about landscape design, maximum 50 words and only 1 illustration. This brick of a book is jam-packed to the rim with important tips and tricks from a rich and diverse range of practitioners in alphabetical order. The book is a room with many doors. Each of the souls offer a world of its own for further intellectual deep diving, but also for designing. The last book I want to recommend to you is this one, The Landscape Project. And I do it because it's not only a beautiful book, but it also looks like a Bible. And Adriaan asked us all to have our suits on today for Erik. And with the book together, I look like a preacher. But no, seriously, it is because it conceptualizes and designs a symbiosis of the angles I sketched with the 4 other books. It is a product of the curriculum of the landscape architecture at Penn and Philadelphia. Congratulations, Delft, with 10 years landscape architecture, but beware of complacency. Rust never sleeps. And I'd like to see in the library on a special shelf all the master programs of all over the world in the library. Finally, landscape architecture's role in the present day confusing environmental crisis might be that we might be well positioned to play a mediating role between nature and culture. And well, the boundaries between the two are blurring these days. But are we the general practitioner of planetary medicine that James Lovelock was famously called for? Well, I'm not sure of that. That might be a dangerous form of overreaching, but the significance of the contribution of our discipline in solving the environmental cluster crisis depends on the future generation of practitioners that have sharpened their reflective skills by having spent some time in your library. Thank you very much, Erik.
Well, then I would like to invite Erik Luiten. He's also professor of landscape architecture at Advection, but also the chief architect of the National Police. So be aware.
Hello, everybody. I brought 2 books that played a rather important role in my educational and professional trajectory. Let me put on my glasses and then again express my greatest gratitude to Jong. I already had the opportunity to thank you on behalf of the whole section for this generous gift. And I'm very happy that we're able to celebrate this live among us all. I started my education in landscape architecture at Wageningen 45 years ago. At that time, despite of the rich collection you showed us today, Erik, there were very little books available to nourish my newborn disciplinary curiosity. Nothing in Dutch, actually. No professional journal, no annual overviews. And it was bare, I must say. Professor Meto Vroom at that time encouraged us to order the landscape of man, shaping the environment from prehistory to the present day. First edition, 1975. So it appeared 2 years after my starting being a student in Wageningen. Written by, or compiled, I should say, by the landscape architects couple Susan and Jeffrey Dellico from the United Kingdom. The book filled a gap, both physically as well as mentally, at least in my personal space. It highlights in a very accessible way iconic repertoire in landscape architecture from the Eastern and the Western Hemisphere, covering many centuries, including some Dutch examples. I'm showing this book because of its importance for my personal development. It confirms my more or less intuitive study choice. It provided a professional entrée and some sort of promise for professional destination. And it has always had a special position in my library. I will read one paragraph from the introduction, in which the authors underline the significance of getting acquainted with historical repertoire. They say art is a continuous process. However new the circumstances may be, it is virtually impossible to create a work of art without antecedents. The challenge of history is not whether it should be studied, but rather the interpretation of what is constant and therefore alive today, and what is ephemeral and only academic. All design, therefore, derives from impressions of the past, conscious or unconscious, subconscious. And in the modern collective landscape, from historic gardens and parks and silhouettes which were created for totally different societal reasons, fundamentally, these again derive from impressions of the world. The classical from the geometry of agriculture, the romantic from natural landscape. Only the small private garden remains true to its instinctive, unchanged purpose of expressing, protecting, and consoling the individual. Second book I brought is called The Cultivated Wilderness, or What is Landscape? Written by Paul Shepherd, son of the famous English architect and landscape architect Peter Shepherd, who wrote Modern Gardens, for example, in the 1950s. I coincidentally stumbled across this book right after its appearance in 1997 in the gigantic Borders bookshop during a trip to Chicago. This book encouraged me to engage in reflective writing, to develop my own editorial style, so to speak, to try to reach out to readers, not necessarily in a scientific manner. Paul, who became later a good friend, showed me the beauty of narration in landscape. The book is divided into three parts: geography, chorography, and topography, each of which contains two travel stories in which he describes his visits to inspiring places. He introduces mostly invented personae with which he discusses, quarrels, or sympathizes about landscape qualities. The essential message the book introduces is the implication of being surrounded by an extreme variety of ratios of wilderness to cultivation. I will read one sentence that summarizes his motivations, and then a paragraph of the chapter in which he visits the polar region of Flevoland. The point of dwelling on landscape now, Paul says, is to re-perceive the ratio of wilderness to cultivation and research the strategies. There's only one way to do that. It is to go out into the landscape and take a good, long, hard look at it. That's one. It was a relief to be back on the dead straight tracks and big open fields of the new polar, where the edge is defined by the rule of flat edge of the perimeter dike. Back to the regular sequence of ditches, the primaries at 4-kilometer intervals, the secondaries feeding into them over every 500 meters, and underground Land drains every 10 to 15, depending on the clay to sand ratio of the soil. The main ditch is drained into a canal, which runs around the polder and is emptying by pumping stations either into the IJsselmeer or into the smaller lakes that act as a buffer between old land and new, to stop the old land from drying out. Everywhere, the steady patterns of farmsteads, lines of windbreak trees, and big flat fields is repeated. Everyone drives with their lights on, because without tents, distances are so difficult to judge. And the back roads are just 16 feet wide. When a vehicle meets another one coming the other way, both cars get their near side wheels onto the shoulder and rattle posts, and rattle past, headlights blazing. Sorry. The whole place seems so managed and serviceable that it takes a while for the freedom of it to soak in. The emptiness, the big chunks of parkland, the cycle tracks threaded through the towns and villages, the proximity of water. Above all, it's the newness, not just as in recently built, but as in never there before. The persistent realization that the sea is being held back so you can walk on the sea bed, that the water, if it broke in, would be 2 fathoms deep and way over your head, has a breathtaking quality to it. I don't need to evoke the miracle of the Red Sea parting, because it's more real than that. It's the miracle of something made out of nothing, the miracle of growth. Thank you very much.
Well, then we proceed to the final part of this event, the opening ceremony of our library. And for that, I would like to invite Saskia de Wit, our dear colleague, an assistant professor of landscape architecture and owner of Saskia de Wit, to introduce us to this. So thank you very much.
So I would like to invite all of you to follow me to the library, where we will I will speak first to Erik, and then you're all free to browse in the library that we've all been talking about. So follow me.